Welcome back to the deep dive. So you've brought us a fascinating collection of sources today, everything from 14th century cookbooks to modern marketing, all circling one topic: the American apple pie.
That's right, and it sets up this wonderful paradox.
It really does. I mean, we use the phrase as American as apple pie all the time. It's the ultimate shorthand for, well, for America. But the more you look into it, the more you realize the dessert isn't from here.
And neither are the apples.
And not even the pie itself as a concept.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack that. How did this dish, which really started as a functional medieval food vessel, travel across the globe and somehow become this potent symbol of the American dream?
It's a huge story.
It is, because food history is never just about the food. It's about migration, trade, economics. And these sources really let us trace that journey right from the wild apple forests to, a marketing boardroom.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. With the apple, it feels like it's from everywhere, but it has a very specific origin point, right?
Absolutely. The evidence points to Central Asia, specifically the mountains of modern-day Kazakhstan. In fact, the old capital, Almaty, literally means father of apples.
Wow.
Yeah, wild apple forests still grow there. It's the genetic hearth of the apple.
So from Kazakhstan, it spreads, I'm guessing, along the Silk Roads?
Precisely. Trade and migration carry it west. It gets cultivated across Europe. And the Romans were particularly good at spreading advanced techniques like grafting all the way to Britain.
But these weren't the shiny, sweet apples we get at the supermarket.
Not at all. That's a crucial detail. Early European apples were often small, hard, and really, really tart. You wouldn't want to just bite into one.
You had to cook them.
You had to cook them, which leads us directly to things like baking.
And that brings us to the pie part of the equation. The idea of baking something in a crust is much older than the apple pie itself.
Oh, much older. The first pies were savory. Think meat fillings. And the crust, well, you have to completely change how you think about the crust.
Wasn't meant to be eaten, was it?
No, not at all. It was made from really rough grains and water, and it was thick, almost like a shell. Its only job was to be a container.
A cooking vessel.
A cooking and preservation vessel. One of the sources called it medieval Tupperware, which I think is just perfect. It sealed the filling, kept it from spoiling. You could travel with it. The flavor was irrelevant.
So when do these two things, the tart apple and the inedible container, finally meet?
That happens in medieval Europe. We can actually pinpoint it to 14th century England.
And we have a recipe.
We do. The earliest one we know of comes from a cookbook called The Form of Curie, which dates to about 1381.
What's in that first apple pie? I have a feeling it's not just apples and cinnamon.
Oh, not even close. It has apples, yes, but also figs, raisins, pears, and get this, saffron.
Saffron in an apple pie.
Saffron, which tells you a lot about the spice trade and wealth, but it also points to the biggest difference between that pie and ours. There's basically no sugar.
Right, and that's all about the economics of the time.
It's entirely about the economics. Sugar was an insanely expensive luxury. For a normal person, a pound of sugar could cost a week's wages. It was for royalty, not for everyday baking.
So for sweetness, they had to rely on
honey sometimes, but mostly the dried fruit. Those figs and raisins packed a huge punch of natural sugar. So that pie wasn't just functional, it was also a way to show off you could afford expensive imported spices. It was a semi-savory status symbol.
What a journey. From a savory status symbol in England to a humble comfort food here. So let's cross the Atlantic. When European settlers arrive in the 17th century, they bring apple seeds with them. Why was that so important?
Well, because North America only had crab apples, which are tiny and incredibly sour. They're basically useless for baking or for making cider. The settlers needed the European varieties they were used to.
And this is where the legendary Johnny Appleseed comes into the story. But there's a common misconception about what he was actually doing, isn't there?
There is. We have this image of him planting orchards so kids could have sweet apples to eat. But John Chapman, that was his real name, was primarily planting apples for hard cider.
Because the water wasn't always safe to drink.
Exactly. Cider was a staple beverage. And the tart, unpredictable apples that grew from seed were actually perfect for fermenting. Not so much for baking a pie.
So even with all these new orchards, how did the pie, the dessert pie, become so popular by the 18th century?
It really came down to practicality. You still had enough usable fruit, and the pie was just an incredible way to preserve it. Apples store well, and that dense crust could keep the filling good for weeks in the winter. It was a reliable source of calories.
But it's still just a practical dessert at this point.
Yeah.
When does it make that leap to become a symbol of national identity?
That happens much, much later. The sources really point to World War II as the turning point.
The phrase "for mom and apple pie."
That's the one. It became this powerful cultural shorthand for everything the soldiers were fighting for. It wasn't about foreign policy. It was about protecting this simple, wholesome domestic image of home.
And that's an incredibly powerful idea to rally around.
It's immense. It took the pie from being just a food and transformed it into a unifying national icon. It stood for family, comfort, stability, all things people were craving.
Which, of course, leads us right into the world of marketing.
Yeah.
Advertisers must have jumped on that feeling of nostalgia.
Oh, immediately. Especially during the Great Depression and then through the war. They didn't just sell you flour or shortening, they sold you patriotism. They sold you the American way of life, all embodied in a perfect slice of pie.
How did they do that visually? What was the strategy?
The strategy was aspiration. You never saw a messy or a burnt pie in an ad. It was always golden brown, flaky, with steam gently rising from it. It suggested that this perfect, wholesome family life was achievable, easy even if you just bought their product.
They were basically commercializing comfort.
They were. And they created this ideal image of what an apple pie should be, and it's an image we're still chasing. Which, brings us nicely to the modern recipe itself.
Okay, let's get into the anatomy of that classic pie. For anyone listening who wants to make one, the sources are clear that it all starts with the apples. You can't just use one kind.
No, that's the classic mistake. You need a mix. The sources suggest Granny Smith for that wonderful tartness and firm texture. It doesn't turn to mush.
And you balance that with something sweeter.
Exactly. Something like a Honeycrisp or a Fuji. That mix gives you a filling that has complexity, not just one-note sweetness.
And in that filling, you've got sugar, spices, and a little bit of lemon juice.
Wow.
Why is that lemon juice so important? It seems like such a small ingredient.
It's a tiny ingredient that does two huge jobs. First, the acid brightens all the other flavors and keeps it from tasting flat. Second, it actually helps the pectin in the apples set properly so your filling isn't runny.
So it's not just for taste, it's structural engineering.
Pretty much. But the real make-or-break element is the crust. This is what separates that medieval shell from the modern dessert. And the rules are strict. Cold butter, ice water, and don't overmix.
Let's break that down. Why does everything have to be so cold?
It's all about controlling gluten. When you keep the butter cold and in little pieces, it coats the flour. When it hits the hot oven, the water in the butter turns to steam and explodes, pushing apart layers of dough. That's what creates those beautiful, flaky layers.
And if you use warm butter or mix it too much,
you get a tough, chewy crust. You basically end up back with that medieval container we started with.
It's amazing. We've literally come full circle. So the final assembly is just as important. Dotting the filling with more butter, cutting those slits in the top.
Right. Those slits are non-negotiable. They let the steam escape so you don't get a soggy top or a pie explosion. It's this beautiful combination of history and science that creates a dessert that's it's a legacy.
It really is. And that idea of a legacy brings us to a final thought. We've traced how this one dish became a symbol for America. But the adjacent sources you shared remind us that every culture has these powerful symbols embedded in food and routine.
They absolutely do.
The materials also touched on the culture of Vietnam, for instance. It talks about the central role of rice, the routine of early morning exercise you see in cities like Hanoi, and of course, the dish banchan.
The grilled pork and noodle dish, right? Made famous when President Obama and Anthony Bourdain ate it together.
Exactly. And those things, the shared meal, the communal exercise, they are just as powerful in defining Vietnamese culture as apple pie is for American culture.
They're core identifiers that symbolize community and resilience.
So this brings us to a question for you, the listener. If food and routine can be this powerful, what is the single non-food tradition or routine that most powerfully defines your own family or national legacy? What's the unexpected piece of heritage that you carry with you?
And being able to see those deep global themes hidden in everyday life is exactly what we love to explore. It's all about understanding what it means to be a global citizen.
And if you want to dive into more stories about travel, life, and living as a global citizen, be sure to check out the source of this deep dive, the blog, A Bus on a Dusty Road.
We really hope you'll sign up for the newsletter. It's the best way to keep up with our community and all the topics we're exploring.
And of course, please subscribe to the podcast version of our content. It's called Dusty Roads, and you can find it on all major podcast platforms.
Finally, we also invite you to subscribe to the Bus on a Dusty Road YouTube channel for even more videos and information.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you next time.